Hello, everybody. Welcome back to It's Called Football as we get ready to bring you all the highlights and all the action that happened over Matchday 13 in the Premier League. Just a quick reminder of some of the games that we had to kick off this match day. We started off with all the action immediately going right to a head with Manchester City taking on Liverpool, as we said in our preview. For those of you that haven't been following the league for very long or at all in the past, these two teams have basically been the main ones fighting it out for every league title over the majority of the last 6 seasons. Liverpool has won one, Manchester City have won five, aside from obviously last season where Liverpool were not the main team kind of hunting with City for the league title. Nevertheless, these two teams have served up classics almost every single time that they've met in the past half a decade or so, and the expectations were high on this game. Burnley firmly in the relegation battle right now. We're taking on West Ham, who have had a very good start to the season. Luton Town, another side in that bottom end of the table. We're taking on Crystal Palace, who are sitting roughly around the middle of the table at the moment. And then another big clash as Newcastle and Chelsea went head to head, while we also saw Nottingham Forest take on Brighton. Uh, Safe to say, these games mostly didn't disappoint. In fact, actually, if there was any game at all that disappointed out of these first five, it was weirdly Man City against Liverpool. It did feel like a bit of a lackluster game, and it's very possible that happened because this is the first game back at the earliest match possible after an international break, where a lot of players only flew back from their various countries back to England. Uh, Within the previous 48 hours or so before this game took place. And it's natural that probably the players hadn't fully acclimatized, adjusted to jet lag and etc. before the game. But um, it makes sense that both teams not fully fit and firing and back in their groove right after the internationals um, canceled each other out basically, and neither team would necessarily, I think, be said to be on top form, um, the way they played, at least in this game. And probably a fair result that it ended up in a draw. Burnley actually were leading for a decent amount of this game, but West Ham managed to come from behind and ultimately scored their winning goal deep, deep into stoppage time at the end of the second half to break Burnley hearts and steal all 3 points. Luton Town had the opposite fortune. They scored a decently late goal to win their home game, their first win at home in the Premier League, and their first win in the top level or the top tier of English football for something like 11,000 days. It's been a long time for Luton, and I'm sure their fans enjoyed every second of it. Crystal Palace will be disappointed given that on paper they probably have a stronger team, but on the day they just didn't show enough, and Luton deserved it. Newcastle then humbled Chelsea. Um, Chelsea have now conceded 4 goals in back-to-back games, and what looked like a great result against Manchester City right before the international break now has a slightly different spin on it because Chelsea have now conceded 8 goals in their last 2 matches. Um, Of course, Chelsea did score 4 last time out, but this time they it was only one moment of genius from Raheem Sterling for Chelsea that was their goal. But ultimately, defensively, Chelsea still have a lot to improve on, and they have the players, they have the quality, but they don't yet have that consistency to be able to consistently get results against top sides and opponents who are at their level, at least in terms of the player quality available. Newcastle take nothing away from them. They fully deserved this win. They played well. They took the game to Chelsea. They showed no fear and were rewarded at the end. Meanwhile, Brighton and Nottingham Forest served up a thriller, with Brighton eventually coming out winners by 3 goals to 2. Forest will be disappointed to not have gotten anything out of the game, given that they did actually take an early lead in the match against Brighton. They did go up 1-0, but from then, Brighton kind of controlled the majority of the game and the flow of the match. Brighton were 2-1 up after going behind, and then although Forest did equalize, it eventually got to a Brighton win. Other fixtures in Matchday 13 saw Sheffield United take on Bournemouth, both those sides near the bottom of the table, and obviously huge for either side if they could get all 3 points. And then came a fixture where Arsenal were laser focused and needed to be as they traveled to Brentford. Um, on paper, for those of you that maybe don't know as much about the league or haven't followed it as much, while Brentford aren't necessarily in and themselves a big name, quote unquote, um, they have been coached excellently by their manager, Thomas Frank. And ever since they first came up into the Premier League, they have caused problems whenever they've hosted any of the big six sides. The big six being Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, the two Manchester clubs, and Tottenham. In fact, since the start of the last season, not this one, Brentford had only lost twice, I believe, at home to top six sides. Generally, they will pick up results against the big six. Reputations seem to mean nothing to them when they host, which is as it should be. But for Arsenal, obviously, big game this one because the two teams most, I guess, in the title chase at the moment with Arsenal were playing each other, which meant Arsenal had to try and capitalize on whoever was going to drop points. And then Sunday saw two games as Tottenham hosted Aston Villa and Everton hosted Manchester United. We talked in detail in our preview as to why both of these games held some significance, some personal, some simply with regards to the table. If you weren't sure about what that significance is, please do go back and check out our Matchday 13 preview, even if the games are done for now. And you'll see exactly why there was so much kind of riding on both of these games. And then today's fixture, Monday, was Fulham against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Probably a bigger match for Fulham because they are further behind in the table on points. They've been on a winless run of several games at the moment. Wolves, despite having suffered from poor officiating decisions, have managed to pick up enough points so far to be in a relatively comfortable position in the middle of the table. But obviously they were looking to build upon that result here at a Fulham side that hasn't won in ages. And there were some surprises. Bournemouth won at Sheffield United, which we did kind of say in our pregame that we expected. Bournemouth have looked the stronger side. They've picked up better results in recent weeks, and they just look more settled as a team, more like they have an idea of what to do to save themselves. So we'll have to wait and see if that can continue, but they did manage to keep up their result here. And Arsenal capitalized on that draw between Manchester City and Liverpool with an 89th minute winning goal uh, against Brentford. Arsenal are now a side that has beaten Brentford without conceding to them both times this season and last season when they've gone to Brentford, which means Brentford have now lost only 3 of their last 23 matches at home. Two of those have been to Arsenal. Um, so it takes great mental fortitude to win a game at Brentford, especially as a top six side, because Brentford know how to sit back, defend, and just absorb pressure, which they did very, very well for most of this game. Full credit to Brentford. They didn't try to play dirty. They didn't just try to tackle and swipe Arsenal players' legs out from under them. They just defended resolutely. They played well. They just didn't allow openings, and it took something special at the end of the game for Arsenal to get their winner. On the other side of North London, though, Tottenham had the opposite fortune. Um, Despite leading against Aston Villa 1-0, they simply couldn't take advantage of the chances they were making in the first half. And Aston Villa managed to equalize right at the end of the first half and then lead the game in the second half, which they then managed to hold on to for the rest of the game, meaning that Tottenham have now lost their last three matches in the league after going unbeaten for their first 10. Um, Very, very sharp bringing down back to earth for the new Spurs manager, their fans, their players. And they will be wondering that aside from injuries, which of course every team has got injuries right now, how has it suddenly gone so wrong? Tottenham have now lost to Chelsea. They've now lost to Aston Villa. They lost just before the break. They need to figure out what to do now to turn this around for them because Chelsea, Wolves, and Aston Villa have now beaten them back to back to back, and in all three of those games, Tottenham did lead initially and then gave away their lead to lose the match entirely. So they will be kind of kicking themselves at this one. We all thought that Everton might come out with a bit of a fire and a point to prove after their points deduction, as we talked about in their preview. But perhaps that emotion got a little bit too much for the players and they didn't play with enough concentration because Manchester United ran out quite comfortable 3-0 winners on the day against Everton. Watching from the game, it also had possibly the goal of the season scored just after 2 minutes, which firmly set the tide in United's favor. And then Monday's game didn't disappoint either as Fulham and Wolves played out a thriller where Fulham led very early on in the first few minutes. Wolves managed to equalize. Fulham led again through a penalty. Wolves equalized with a penalty of their own, and then Fulham got another penalty um, in the last couple of minutes of the game. Uh, while the second penalty that Wolves received was probably fair, there are dubious questions being asked about the first penalty that Fulham received. And Wolves probably have a reason to feel hard done by yet again by an officiating decision. I did watch the game, and while I initially did think it was a foul, the replays which VAR was using suggested that the player who had committed the so-called foul for the first Fulham penalty had actually managed to make some contact with the ball, and the replay could show it fairly clearly. So I'm not sure why that decision wasn't reversed, but Wolves will be incensed. So look at how the table now has shaped up after matchday 13, with Manchester United, Newcastle, Brighton, and West Ham all picking up wins in their games. They've continued to maintain their positions. And because Aston Villa and Spurs had a bit of a breathing space on the teams right below them, Villa's victory does make them leapfrog Tottenham, and Villa are now in fourth place. Tottenham dropped down to fifth, but because of the little bit of breathing space they had, they do still remain above sixth place Manchester United. However, obviously now there is no more room for error as far as Tottenham are concerned. They cannot afford to drop more points. And we'll talk a little more about that when we do our Matchday 14 preview a little later this week. At the top, Manchester City and Liverpool's draw, coupled with Arsenal's win, means that Arsenal leapfrog both of them and go back to the top of the table uh, as we kind of end the first third of this season. It's looking like a very interesting title race. You can see that from first to fifth, they're all separated by just 4 points. Even Manchester United, who started so poorly and so inconsistently, are not actually all that far behind. Um, but of course, United need results to go poorly for all five of the teams above them for a couple of weeks in order to get themselves back into the title mix. The same applies to Newcastle, of course. Chelsea's defeat uh, means that they remain in 10th. They could have dropped further if Brentford who were sitting right below them, had beaten Arsenal or had gotten any result against Arsenal. But Chelsea's defeat, coupled with Brentford's defeat, means that Chelsea managed to hold on to their spot in the top half, although they now are a little further away from trying to overtake the next teams above them. The bottom half, like we said, Brentford is sitting in 11th place. They're level on points with Chelsea, but they just have one worse goal difference at the moment. So it depends really on how Brentford and Chelsea do. They have played each other recently, which means that there's no chance that Brentford can directly beat Chelsea to overtake them. They will simply need to start putting together some results. Wolves' defeat means that they didn't get a chance to get into the top half. They would have done so if they had won today at Fulham. They would have taken Chelsea's place in the top 10, but given their defeat, they are now remaining in 12th place, as are Crystal Palace after their defeat to Luton. Fulham's victory combined with Forest's defeat to Brighton means that the two of them swap places. Fulham are now up in 14th, level on points with Crystal Palace, and with Wolves just worse off in goal difference. Nottingham Forest below them on points now, but not that far off that they can't catch the teams above them. While Bournemouth's victory over Sheffield United means that they increase the gap between themselves and the bottom three. There are now 7 points separating Bournemouth from those bottom three dreaded spots, which will be great news for Bournemouth. Luton as well will be happy because they now have some breathing space from the bottom three with their win against Crystal Palace being 4 points ahead of 18th place means that Luton cannot fall back into the bottom three after just one poor match week. They would need two match days now where they maybe drop points and the teams below them pick up points in order to slip back into those spots. So Luton will be thrilled to have put some daylight between themselves and Sheffield United in 18th place right now. Of course, the bottom three are still in their own conundrum, with all three of them losing this weekend. With every passing week, the pressure just grows. And Burnley, of course, have that unwanted record continuing of just continuing to lose home games this season. They need to find a way to see games over the line. For Everton, obviously, the points deduction has put them in the position they're in right now, but they were quite soundly beaten and didn't really deserve anything out of the game. So, some big moments of the match day. It was very difficult to pick one match or one sequence of events that stood out. So, we are just going to be highlighting some of the big things that just happened across this entire match day. Liverpool were one of the teams against whom Erling Haaland had not yet scored in the league, and he did. He doesn't really, he can't be kept quiet for long. And for some reason, Liverpool really didn't defend him very well. Um, and when he scored his goal, it felt like it had been coming because he was left strangely unmarked with lots of space, and you cannot do that against Erling Haaland. He will punish you if you leave him with too much time and space to think and figure out what he's going to do next. Fortunately for Liverpool, they managed to respond late in the game when Mohamed Salah managed to tee up right back Trent Alexander-Arnold, who gets in amongst the goals for Liverpool a lot more regularly than you would think for a defender. He did score the equalizing goal and then proceeded to immediately go over to the City fans and start shushing them, which it wasn't received well, as you can imagine. These two teams having developed a little bit of a rivalry over the last few years means that there's a lot of tension whenever they play each other. Great achievement by Luton to get their first home win of the season. What a time to get it, to make sure that they created some distance between themselves at the bottom three. Given their early start to the season, a lot of people predicted that Luton wouldn't stand a chance at all of staying in the league. They felt that they might actually sit at the bottom the entire season, and they are quietly simply doing their best and going about their business. Uh, and at the moment, with one third of the way through the season, they are not in the relegation zone and they cannot be after the next match day either. So well done to them, and we'll see whether they can continue to make this push for survival and be successful in that push as we keep going. 007 is very regularly associated with a famous secret agent. Uh, for those of you that are unaware of pop culture because you've been hiding under a rock for the last millennium or more, 007 generally refers to James Bond, the secret agent. In this case, however, it refers to something else, far more unwanted for the team in question, Burnley's home form this season. They have now had 7 home games in this Premier League season with 0 wins, 0 draws, and 7 defeats out of their 7 games. That unwanted record continues to get worse, and manager Vincent Company has got to figure something out for them because your home games are supposed to be where you stand the best chance of picking up points, and at the moment, Burnley aren't doing it. They're coming close at times, and then whether it's concentration or I don't even know what it is, they simply are not seeing games through when they actually manage to get a lead. It's insane, and the fact that their only points have come away is a concern and should be a concern for them. Kai Havertz has been the subject of a lot of scrutiny and a lot of ridicule since his big move from Chelsea to Arsenal this past summer. But manager Mikel Arteta has continued to show unwavering faith in him, and he was rewarded, and Havertz was rewarded this week because he was the big hero. Came on as a sub when Arsenal looked devoid of ideas against Brentford, and his runs into the box, his aerial ability means that Arsenal started to control more of the duels and the 50-50 battles that happen in the middle of the pitch. And it was ultimately Havertz who provided an outlet when Bukayo Saka sent in a cross in the 89th minute, and Havertz managed to sense that the cross was coming, sprinted into the back post, and headed in, instantly gathering so much more goodwill from the Arsenal support and simultaneously annoying so many rival fans, which is always, always a good thing. Um, Kudos to Havertz to continuing to fight and continuing to simply get his head down, work hard. And he said after the game in his post-match interview that it's not a time for him to worry about himself or any struggles in front of goal. He simply is there to try and do his job for the team, not worry about ego or anything like that. He's simply making himself available for the manager, for his teammates, and that is the perfect attitude. And I really like that from any player, that they know the game is not an individual one. It's not about you as an individual at all. You are part of 11 on the field. It's your job to do what's best for the team. There are teammates of Havertz's that could learn that from him, and there are so many more players in the league that could learn that lesson, and be the better for it. Anthony Gordon was sensational, and he inspired Newcastle's blitzing of Chelsea this past weekend. He set up Jamal Lascelles' goal to put Newcastle 2-1 up. He also scored the fourth goal himself. He was simply unplayable, and Chelsea's defense couldn't handle him at all. He seems to be going from strength to strength, and although there have been injury concerns and inconsistencies because of that in the past, he looks like he's put that behind him for the time being. New Tottenham coach Ange Postecoglou had such a blistering start to the league season, unbeaten in his first 10 games, top of the table after those 10 matches, and he had won the Manager of the Month award for 3 months, the first 3 months of the season for August, September, and October. And since then, Tottenham haven't gotten a single point. They've lost all 3 of their matches, and yes, their opponents are not the easiest. Chelsea is not easy. Wolves have taken points off some of the top sides, and Aston Villa, of course, is not difficult. But Aston Villa is tough. Wolves are still tough. And I don't think it's been a case of complacency. I think it's simply been a case of Injuries piling up, but that's happened for almost every team in the league, and they're still pulling out results. Um, it's not even about bad decisions going their way because Tottenham have actually received decisions favorably in some of their key matches this season. They simply are not putting together results and performances the way they were before. And some of it is their own doing because some of the key players they've missed when they've dropped points have been due to red cards, and that means the players were stupid enough to get red cards, which shouldn't have happened. But the manager obviously has some fixing to do, starting with next weekend, where Tottenham have yet another big game, and yet they're quickly running out of time to turn things around if they want to get back into this title race. And the goal of the season, potentially, that we've seen, even though it's only November and the season goes until May, we may have just seen the best goal of the season and one of the all-time great Premier League goals. Alejandro Garnacho for Manchester United, just after 2 minutes against Everton, managed to conjure up a spectacular bicycle kick to put United ahead and start setting them on course for what eventually became a comfortable 3-0 victory. In the first half, actually, Garnacho's goal was the only reason perhaps that United even had any sort of an advantage or any comfort because Everton got back into that game so strongly they just didn't take their chances. In the second half, United had settled and they comfortably scored a second and third to put the game beyond any doubt. But take nothing away, Garnacho had a special moment. It was not luck by any stretch of the imagination. It was simply sensational skill. And for a player as young as he is, that's something that he will remember for the rest of his life. That goal will definitely go down in history as one of the best individual league goals ever scored. Um, huge, huge moment for him. Huge. So, Premier League season is 38 matches, and we have just finished the 13th, which means we're just over one third of the way into this league season, and thought we'd just bring you a quick summary of some of the big performers, teams and players that have caught our eyes so far, and just been catching the eye generally in the league. First of all, teams. The most goals scored, perhaps unsurprising that the current champions, Manchester City, are the team with the most goals scored at the moment. Not by a long shot. There are teams that are right behind them, but Manchester City have 33 goals, and I think the next closest team has 31. But that being said, City have still been the most prolific. The least goals conceded before this match day was a tie between two sides, Arsenal and Liverpool. However, given that Arsenal didn't concede against Brentford and Liverpool conceded to Manchester City, the least goals conceded now, just by one, is Arsenal at the moment. Their defense has been very good so far. They're not allowing opposing teams many opportunities, including top scorers Manchester City, who weren't able to score when Arsenal and City met. It's well known that football is a team sport. You cannot just do stuff on your own, and sometimes you can't do stuff as just the full 11. You need your bench players, your impactors to have exactly that, your impact off the bench. And here, just as a kind of interesting note, we have the most impact off the bench in terms of goal scoring. So how many goals have been scored by players that have come off the bench? Uh, Arsenal had that with Kai Havertz against Brentford, and Brighton actually had a forward João Pedro come off the bench to score twice for them in their victory over Nottingham Forest this past weekend. And that actually puts them level because both Arsenal and Brighton have had 10 goal contributions from players who started games on the bench. And the most clean sheets, although Arsenal have had goalkeeper rotation, this season between Aaron Ramsdale and David Raya. As a unit, as a club, they are the team so far with the most clean sheets, with six between their two goalkeepers, with Aaron Ramsdale having two, I believe, and David Raya having four. Of course, even within the teams, there will be standout individuals. The overall top scorer so far is, again, unsurprisingly whatsoever, Erling Haaland, who has scored 14 goals so far for Manchester City. The next closest behind him is Mohamed Salah for Liverpool, who has 10. So he's not miles and miles ahead like he was at this stage last season, but he is still comfortably the most prolific goal scorer in the league this season. The top assister actually comes from a surprise team, Pedro Neto of Wolves, who has actually missed the last three matches of theirs through suspension, or no, sorry, not through suspension, through injury. And yet nobody has set up enough goals to overtake him. He currently has 7 assists so far for Wolves this season and is outright the top assister at the moment in the league. The top defender and goalkeeper, there's different metrics by which we could measure these blocks, clearances, goals. But for defenders and goalkeepers, the biggest thing that they will want every game is a clean sheet, is stopping their opponents from scoring. And in that regard, at the moment, the best defender in the league is William Saliba, who has been a part of all 6 clean sheets that Arsenal have had so far in the league this year. Like we said earlier, Arsenal have rotated keepers, which means neither keeper has been the one who's gotten all 6 of the clean sheets, but Saliba was the man in defense all 6 occasions where the clean sheets were gotten. But the individual goalkeepers that have the most clean sheets is actually a three-way tie, with some surprises in there. We have Sam Johnstone of Crystal Palace. Despite them sitting 13th in the table, they have had the joint most clean sheets so far in the league this year. Also on 5 clean sheets after this match day, actually, which helped him get there, is Andre Onana for Manchester United, who had a bit of a rocky start in the opening weeks, but has looked a lot more solid more recently. And of course, their 3-0 win at Everton this past weekend was the 5th clean sheet, which has put him level. And then the other one, which is perhaps not as surprising, is Nick Pope for Newcastle United, who has also got 5 clean sheets so far. And Newcastle obviously have been a little more dominant in a lot of their matches, but they do still concede the odd goal here and there. That being said, Pope has had 5 matches so far where he hasn't conceded. So those are some of our big performers so far after the 1/3 point. So how did we do in our predictions? Well, I kind of thought that City versus Liverpool was going to be a little more of the usual electric fixture where both teams go for the jugular, for the attack, and it was a little quieter than that. But ultimately, I did expect them to cancel each other out, which is what happened. So not the right scoreline, but the right result. Did think that neither side really had everything to win this game. Burnley and West Ham, like I said, I expected Burnley to score one at home, but I did expect that West Ham was a stronger side. They took longer than I expected West Ham to lead in the game, but ultimately they did. Not by the same scoreline, not as dominant, but they did end up winning. Luton and Crystal Palace surprised me because Palace do seem to have the better team on paper, but to be fair, Luton have managed to pull out results at home despite not being wins. They've managed to hold Liverpool to a draw. They've managed to cause issues for a lot of sides when they've faced them so far, even if they have lost some of those games at home. It's never been a blowout, really. It's been more narrow than that. And I don't think I would have predicted based on form. I don't think it would have happened that I would have guessed Luton that this would be the game that they would win at home. But well done to them and kudos. Chelsea were disappointing. I thought that they would put up a lot more of a fight against Newcastle, given their great result against Manchester City. It should have been very encouraging, but it's possible that the international break had killed that momentum. Newcastle suffered nothing of the sort. And although the scoreline in Newcastle Chelsea was 1-1 at a certain point in the game, Chelsea just fell apart in the second half. And once they'd let in 2 goals in 2 minutes to go 3-1 down, there was no coming back at that point. Initially, you can believe me or not, I was going to predict before in the preview video for this match day, I was actually going to say that this might be 3-2 one way or the other for Forest and Brighton. And at the end, I second guessed myself and thought maybe it'll be a little more cagey and a little more low scoring. And I went with 2-1. I did think Brighton was going to win, um, but not by a large margin, and that's exactly what happened. But more goals than I decided to go with in my prediction. The same goes with Bournemouth and Sheffield, but a little bit in reverse. I thought that maybe Bournemouth wouldn't run riot as much. They were 3-0 up for a portion of the game before Sheffield United pulled one back. But ultimately, they did win the match by 2 goals, so I'm going to count that as a small victory here. Um, Brentford and Arsenal again. I knew it would be a cagey match, and Brentford are generally a tough side. They usually tend to score, even if their opponent is a top 6 side. Given how Brentford set up, it's perhaps not surprising that they didn't score because they spent the majority of the game defending, but they defended it well. And Arsenal did in the end win by just a single goal. Again, right result, right goal difference, not quite the right scoreline. I think if Spurs had taken their chances, they probably would have beaten Villa. As it stood, scoreline was in reverse. Um, but full credit to Villa, they just keep on going and they rise and rise in the league table. They are now in 4th place and within touching distance actually of top spot. Should the top 3 all drop points next match day and Villa win, Villa will be sitting at the top of the Premier League. I'm disappointed in Everton. I thought that they would put in more of a fight against Manchester United, given all the off-field stuff that was going on, and their fans were in great voice in the game, but their players were not. And in the end, comfortable victory for Manchester United. Fulham pleasantly surprised me in this game because I thought that just like most of their recent matches, they'll simply flop and die, and not really put up much of a fight. And Wolves have looked good, and they've taken points off some of the big sides. And surprising, but good to see that Fulham have that much of a fight in them. Yes, they were perhaps gifted one um, dubious looking penalty, but they won't care. They're not the ones that gave themselves the penalty. They just were the beneficiaries of the decision. Um, Good win for Fulham, but nowhere close in my prediction. Sorry about that being a slightly longer video. We apologize for that if you got bored, but hopefully you enjoyed it and got something out of it. But we will leave you there for now. There are Champions League matches coming in midweek where last season's top 4 in the Premier League will be playing in their European matches across Tuesday and Wednesday, while some of the teams just below them will be playing in the second tier competition on Thursday, the Europa League. And then we will be back on Thursday or Friday with a look ahead to Matchday 14. For now, we'll leave you here. Please drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, share it with anyone that might be interested, and take care. Remember, it's called football.